Hi everyone, Luke here from Weekend Tour Pros. We're back again in the TrackMan studio at City Golf in Chichester, and we're going to put another golf ball to the test. And once again, it's a golf ball requested by you guys watching down the lens. It's the Srixon Q Star Tour. Now, I've heard some really good things about this golf ball from some of you guys in the comments. And recently, when I got fitted for some new clubs, the fitter recommended this as a good ball for someone of my swing speed to put to the test. So really keen to give it a hit and see how it performs compared side by side against the #1 ball in golf, the Titleist Pro V1. So let's get stuck in. Okay, so before we start the test, I just want to tell you a little bit of information about the Srixon Q Star Tour golf ball. Now, first of all, its price point. In the UK, this golf ball is £29.99 a dozen, and it does come in a variety of colours because you guys keep telling me that you like golf balls that come in a variety of colours. So you can get it in the white that I'm testing today. It also comes in a yellow option, and you do also have the very different Divide golf ball, which is half yellow, half blue, orange or red. You choose which one of those that you want. Now, I have got a friend, John, shout out to JB if you're watching. He has given the Divide version of this golf ball a bit of a test. And he does say it is really helpful when you're putting to get that feedback on if you've hit a good putt. And he does also say it's a bit of fun on the golf course, and it is really easy to find out on the golf course. So maybe something for you to consider, because all three golf balls do perform exactly the same. Now, in terms of the characteristics of this golf ball, it is a 3-piece urethane cover golf ball, exactly the same as a lot of premium balls out on the market, including the Titleist Pro V1 that we'll be comparing it to today. And in terms of its compression, it is rated at 72, which is on the softer side of golf balls, but it's not as soft as something like the Bridgestone Tour B RXS. So if you do want a slightly softer feeling golf ball, then definitely give that one a test. I'll put a link to the review of it that I've done up there. And it's definitely not as firm as the Titleist Pro V1 that we're comparing it to today. In terms of the feature of this golf ball, it does have the fast layer core and the spin skin, which I think are both features of the Srixon Z Star as well. And just looking at the side of the box, Srixon tell us that this ball is going to be a soft feeling golf ball that delivers long distance, a mid to high ball flight with high greenside spin and low driver spin. That sounds like a fantastic combination. So let's put it to the test against the Pro V1 and see how it performs. Now, just to tell you how we're going to do the test, we're going to start with a 20-yard pitch shot with a 60-degree wedge. Then we're going to move up to hitting full shots with a pitching wedge, a 7-iron and a driver. Let's set up the test and let's get stuck in. Right, first one with a Q Star, 60-degree wedge. See what we've got. Okay, so done hitting the 20-yard pitch shot with the 60-degree wedge. And my first impressions in the bay are the Srixon makes a really noticeable low, dull sound compared to that slightly higher pitch, clippier Pro V1 sound that we're used to. Now, it might just be the acoustics of being here in the studio today, and you might not notice that when you're out on the grass, but it was really noticeable as soon as I hit the first shot. And even as I was hitting more shots with it, I really struggled to notice how the ball felt, because all I could pick up on was the acoustics of that sound while we were here in the bay. In terms of the numbers, again, we need to get home and look at them in a second, but the Pro V1 seemed to have a really consistent ball flight, and it did seem to spin a little bit more than what I was getting out the Q Star Tour. The Q Star Tour did also seem to have a little bit more variability in terms of its ball flight. I did get a couple that popped up and a couple that stayed lower. Didn't get that with the Pro V1. Now, that could be me as the handicap golfer and my inability to have a consistent strike, but it might just be that it's the golf ball as well. So let's get home and let's take a look at that data side by side and see what the numbers say. So let's get a deep dive into that data. Starting on the left-hand side, you can see that my club head speed, my ball speed and my smash factor, very similar with both of these balls on a 20-yard pitch shot, and they're very consistent in terms of the speed of the ball. As we felt in the bay, the Q Star Tour is slightly lower spinning at 4724 versus 5078, but that isn't anything too significant. I've seen other cheaper golf balls than a premium golf ball like the Pro V1 with a bigger drop off of spin in a 20-yard pitch shot, so the Q Star Tour has done really well in that regard. In terms of carry, you can see that the numbers were very similar, which just shows you I was hitting a really similar consistent shot on the day. The one thing I did feel in the bay that I just said in that kind of summary is that I thought the Q Star Tour was potentially launching a little bit higher, or there was certainly a few that popped up. This is why I always like to back up the feels that I'm having with the real data, because we can see in the data here that both of the ball flights are really comparable. Yes, the Q Star Tour does launch a little bit higher, but the peak heights are the same, and although that land angle is again a little bit steeper with the Q Star Tour on account of it popping up, it is really similar. I also felt like the consistency of the Q Star Tour potentially wasn't as good as the Pro V1, and whilst the data shows that, we're talking about a really minuscule amount of difference here, so I think we can safely say that the Q Star Tour definitely performed a little bit better in the numbers than maybe I felt in the bay, and it might have been those acoustics that were just putting me off a little bit. Let's dive into the pitching wedge. Okay, so just done hitting those pitching wedges with the Srixon Q Star Tour, comparing it against the Titleist Pro V1. First things first, I could notice a slightly softer feel of the Srixon Q Star this time. Wasn't able to pick up any of the sounds that I was feeling with the shorter shot. In terms of the performance, they were both launching and with similar land angles and similar peak heights as what I was feeling in the bay. But what I was noticing is that the Srixon Q Star Tour potentially was spinning a little bit less, and as a result carrying just a couple of yards further. But let's go home and look at the data side by side to see if those feels in the bay are backed up by the numbers. So let's just start on the left hand side again. The club head speed, you can see my club head speed was a fraction lower with the Q Star Tour compared to the Pro V1, but I did get a fraction more ball speed out of the Q Star Tour compared to the Pro V1. It is only minuscule, but we can say with a pitching wedge in my hands, the Q Star Tour is a slightly faster golf ball. We did say in the bay that we felt like the spin was a little bit lower with the Q Star Tour, and that is backed up by the numbers. I must admit it's a little bit more significant drop off than I actually expected it to be when I looked at the data. 6,509 revs with the Q Star Tour versus 7,638 with the Pro V1. That means I'm getting circa 15% more spin with a pitching wedge using the Pro V1 when compared to the Q Star Tour. One thing I do want to call out here though is just the consistency of the spin of both of these golf balls. The Pro V1 is famed for its consistency, that's why so many tour pros play it. They know what's going to happen every single time they hit it. But the Q Star Tour has performed really fantastic as well in terms of spin consistency here. Only 326 revs of difference in standard deviation. In terms of carry number, we can see that the Srixon Q Star Tour is a slightly longer ball in a pitching wedge for me by 2.2 yards. That's on account of the fact it's slightly faster ball and a slightly lower spinning ball. But in terms of those flight windows, those launch windows, we can see they're really comparable. The launch angle itself is only 0.2 of a degree in it. The peak height's only 2 feet of difference, and the land angles are virtually identical with only 0.1 degrees in it. So again, another feather in the cap of the Srixon is just how consistent that flight window is. Right, let's move on to the 7-irons. Definitely feels softer. You can really feel it as we're moving up through the bag. Okay, so done hitting the 7-irons with the Srixon Q Star Tour compared to that Pro V1, and initial feelings in the bay is very similar to the pitching wedge. I think the Q Star Tour was spinning a little bit less, but it was potentially going a couple of yards further, and I could definitely feel it felt a little bit softer than that Pro V1 again. But let's go home and look at that data side by side to see what the real data says. Let's deep dive into those 7-iron numbers then. Starting on the left hand side, you can see that my club head speed and my ball speed with the Q Star Tour was a fraction lower than the Pro V1, but the smash factors are virtually identical, so I think that's just due to the fact that I was maybe getting a little bit tired when I was hitting the Srixon Q Star Tour shots. In terms of the spin rate, once again we can see that the spin rate has dropped down with the Q Star Tour. It's about 800 revs lower than the Pro V1 at this part of the test, 3962 versus 4746. What we can see though is with the pitching wedge it was about 1000 revs of difference. It's now come down to about 800 revs of difference. So it'll be really interesting to see when we move up to driver if those kind of spin rates get even closer again. I did point out the consistency of the spin rate with the pitching wedge. It's even better with a 7-iron, which is incredible. 174 revs of standard deviation with the Q Star Tour. It actually in this test beat the Pro V1 that had a consistency of 228. That spin consistency on a batch of like 15 to 27 irons is absolutely mind-blowing for a ball at this price point. So Srixon, great job in getting consistency of spin. In terms of the carry number, we can see, just like with the pitching wedge, the Q Star Tour is a couple of yards longer than the Pro V1, 154.8 yards versus 152.5. In terms of those flight windows, we can see here though that there is a little bit of a difference, particularly on the launch angles of these two golf balls. The Q Star Tour does launch 1.5 degrees higher than the Pro V1, and as a result it goes about 3 feet higher, which again I think you'd really struggle to notice that in the air, but I definitely think you'd notice how quickly it pops up off of the face as you're trying to get it into the air. The land angles with both of these balls virtually identical, so you'll be coming into the green with a really similar steepness and ability to hold the green. What does this tell me overall then with a 7-iron? It tells me that I'm going to carry the ball a little bit further with a Srixon Q Star Tour than a Pro V1, but I'm probably going to stop it just a fraction quicker on the green. I don't think you'd notice that if you played these balls side by side. I don't think the average golfer would be able to notice that out on the green. So I think these two golf balls are really comparable considering the price point difference. I did really enjoy the feel of the Q Star Tour though, hitting 7-irons. That definitely was a win for me. Let's move on to the driver. Okay, so just finished up hitting the drivers with the Q Star Tour there compared to the Pro V1, and I'm really not sure what the data is going to show here when we get home. My gut feel is that the Q Star Tour was a little bit slower again and maybe not as long, but I'm really not sure because I think my strike was a little bit inconsistent. There were some good ones, some not so good ones, so really keen to get home and see what these numbers look like. So you just heard me say in the bay there that I couldn't feel the differences between these two golf balls, and I really needed to get home and look at the data. There's a reason for that. These two data sets are virtually identical, and I think this is an absolute testament to Srixon. So let's just look at the left-hand side first of all. You can see that my club head speed on average was 1 mile an hour slower with the Q Star Tour. That's because the last batch of shots I hit with driver were with the Q Star Tour. Although I go back at 1 and 2 between the balls, I did hit the Q Star Tour last, and I was starting to get really tired. I'd hit nearly 200 shots at this point in the bay, including about 30 to 40 drives. The ball speed is therefore a couple of mile an hour down, but the important thing to note here is the smash factor with both of these balls was identical, and that says to me that if my club head speed was the same, the ball speed would be the same, and therefore the smash factor the same. And that's why smash factor is a really good important metric to look at when you're looking at driver or any ball comparison. In terms of drivers, we always talk about high launch, low spin. We can see here that the launch angle was virtually identical with both of these balls, 14.7 with the Q Star Tour versus 14.5 with the Pro V1. And just look at those spin rates. There's only 20 revs of difference, 2833 with the Q Star Tour, 2853 with the Pro V1. And once again, the Q Star Tour is more spin consistency, 252 revs of standard deviation versus 436 with the Pro V1. All the way through this test, the spin consistency of the Q Star Tour has been absolutely fantastic. Credit to Srixon, what a great job. If we just introduce the peak heights and the land angles, you can see that they're virtually identical as well. These two balls are flying on identical trajectories with the driver in my hands. It's just mind-blowing. Yes, we can see that the carry number is a couple of yards down with the Q Star Tour, and so is the total. But again, going back to the beginning, because those smash factors are equal, I think if my club head speed was the same, my ball speed would be the same, the spin rates already are the same, and therefore I think we'd see identical carries and identical totals. In my hands, hitting driver, both of these balls are identical. Brilliant job, Srixon. So you've seen me hit the shots, you've seen me talk through the data, and that now leads me to the question of would I game the Srixon Q Star Tour golf ball? Absolutely. The spin consistency on its own was really mind-blowing and comparable to any premium golf ball I've tested. It's actually beaten the Pro V1 on most parts of this test, and I think that in itself means that Srixon have done a fantastic job with this golf ball. In that short game part of the test, we could see that the ball was performing really similar to a Pro V1 with just a small drop off in spin, and with the driver we could see that the golf ball was performing virtually identical to a Titleist Pro V1, which was just absolutely mind-blowing. In that middle part of the bag, we could see that we got an extra couple of yards out of the Q Star Tour compared to the Pro V1. It did fly on a really nice window. The only sort of sacrifice we were making was that slight reduction in spin with the 7-iron and a bit of a significant drop off in spin with the pitching wedge. And that's probably the only negative mark I would say from this test against the Srixon Q Star, is just how much that spin dropped off with a pitching wedge. But if you know that and you know the ball's going to do the same thing every time, you can account for it and have the confidence that the golf ball will stop once it lands on the green. Also, I think Srixon have put this in a fantastic price point at £29.99 a dozen in the UK. And I definitely think if you've played other Srixon golf balls before but not tried the Q Star Tour, you should definitely give it a go. If you're currently playing the Z Star, you might save yourself a few quid without giving away too much performance. If you historically played something like the Soft Feel or the AD 333, you might really enjoy how this golf ball feels and enjoy the performance just as well. All that remains for me to say is, if you like my video, please do consider giving it a thumbs up. It really does help other like-minded golfers to find my content on YouTube. And I'm really keen to grow my channel and my subscriber base at the moment. So if you're not yet subscribed, please do consider hitting that button and you'll get notified of all my videos when they land on the channel. I've got some really cool ideas that I'm filming at the moment. They'll be landing soon on the channel, and we'll be pausing the club and ball reviews to make sure we get those videos out. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Keep on that quest to become a weekend tour pro. Goodbye.